Well, I'm joined now by a cast of thousands. Laura Gardiner from the Resolution Foundation, whose report prompted today's talk on this. Dame Esther Rantzen, the founder of the Silver Line, a helpline for older people. Shiv Malik, author of the book Jilted Generation, referring to his generation as jilted. And Sean O'Grady from The Independent, who has written about this. Sean, do the young who complain about this complain too much?
Yes, they do. Like the title of the book, Jilted Generation, there's nothing jilted about this generation. There's no sense in which we, in my generation, or Esther's even, have eaten their lunch. We made their lunch for them. There's an idea abroad that everything was easy in the old days. It was a sort of nirvana of economics. It was not. Some of us lived through it. The 1970s and the 1980s were an orgy of high inflation, mega high interest rates, negative equity when we had housing crashes and we had to get through those. As I say, rising unemployment, public services were continually under strain. The economy went bust in 1976. We had to go to the IMF. These were terrible years. We lived through them. We built the country that we have now today by seeing that through, by reducing union power, by reforming the economy, and by making all the changes that have made all the wonderful things, all the gentrification, the wonderful new building here at the BBC.
Don't
all
laugh,
these
Esther,
things,
he's on your side.
all these things are possible. The only good thing about the 1970s was the television was better, and that was thanks to people like Esther.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But that's the truth of the matter. And so, as I say, you get this idea that everything was wonderful in my day and terrible today, and that's just not right.
Seriously speaking, would you rather have been born 15 years earlier than you were born, 20 years earlier than you were born? Do you think it were in material terms?
Yes. I mean, I think that's the existential problem that this country now faces. And it's not just this country, it's actually America too, and a lot of other developing nations. And that might help explain why politics also seems in such turmoil. But when the boomer generation can't seem to replicate what every other generation has done before them, which is to make the next generation richer, this is their legacy. Right. This is truly their legacy. And it makes it to the point where exactly that. You think, my God, I wish I was born earlier. I would have been earning more. I would have had a better standard of living. I'd have a house. I'd be more able to have a family. I'd be able to settle down, own my own home, have
Laura,
assets.
just give us the facts. Sorry, I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt.
I mean, you know,
but just
Sean was giving us his history lesson. I thought I'd get in there.
Would Shiv have been literally worse off being born 20 years before, or about the same, or a little better off, but it feels worse off because he's not as much better off as he wants to be? These are all different theories.
Well, what we have in terms of incomes, which are the best measure of current living standards, incomes after housing costs we've looked at, is every generation since 1881, and we only start then because that's the first we can measure, has done better than the last at each age, at each stage of their life.
So a 20-year-old now should be better off than a 20-year-old 30 years ago.
That is what we have come to expect as a society throughout the 20th century and before. But so far, and they haven't got all the way, not all of them have got all the way through yet, but the millennials, the generation born between 1981 and 2000, have failed to achieve those living standards improvements on the generation before. So this looks like a real threat to the very core that's underpinned our social contract, that generations improve on the previous.
So just to be 100% clear, it's not just that Shiv's expectations of being richer than his parents have been dashed. He is actually a little bit behind where they were.
Slightly above, slightly below, but compared to Generation X just before, basically the same. Those large improvements have disappeared. That's in a big part due to the recession and subsequent pay squeeze we've had over the last 10 years, but there's other trends there too. And with that kind of start in life, we should be very worried about the future incomes path of the millennials.
Which is...
Let's go to Esther. What do you hear when you hear that, Esther? Your heart break for the youngers or not?
Well, a certain amount of self-pity going on here, which is quite interesting. I mean, I'm awfully sorry for your youth and prime that it was so miserable, and I'm terribly sorry that you feel that you've lost out to the rich fat cats of the older generation. I was actually talking to a family. The mum was all her savings had gone in to pay for her care and her husband's care, so much so that her husband was left unburied for 7 weeks because she couldn't afford his funeral. So I think you're quite right that some people are better off than others. There's still a great deal of poverty in old age. As I am 76 years old, as I believe you are announcing to your viewers, that's fine, that's perfectly all right, I'm not ashamed of it. Let me just say one thing to you. Wealth and happiness are not the same thing. Yes, I worry about the millennials and younger. I worry about all kinds of dangers facing them. Yes, I worry about my own future because I don't want to be a burden on my children, and so I have to have enough in my savings to pay for my own care. That's my big worry. But in the meantime, stop being so blooming envious of previous generations and little old people like us, if you'll pardon me saying so.
Absolutely right.
Get on with it. Enjoy your life. You've got health and strength. You look quite fit.
I always hate this condescension, which I always receive from Esther every time we have this debate. Look, it's very simple.
What do you mean every time?
Well, this
Go on,
is
just
at
give us
least
your
the third
point.
time.
Give us your point.
It's very simple. People in my generation need some very simple things. They
Go
need
on.
housing, they need the ability to have and raise a family.
Love them.
And they
Care
need to be
about
able
them.
to get on in life and know that their futures will actually be better. If that doesn't happen for our generation, it will mean the entire country will eventually go bust.
Future better in what way? This is what I'm
In
asking
those
you.
exact kinds
You
of
want
ways
a
you've
bigger
already
television?
talked about.
You take.
No, I want for my... Look, this is really serious.
I'm
right?
listening.
Because this is an existential threat to our country.
I never know what that means.
Go on. What is
It's,
the
it's
big
very
word.
simple.
It's a big word.
Again, it's the ability to own a home or be able to rent in a place where you can raise a family. Anyone who's under 35 knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Well,
and if your generation
why
doesn't
are you
have
shaking
that...
your head, Sean? Because
Because
definitely it's harder for this generation.
There's no sense of perspective in this. You know, I don't want to sound like an ultra old guy, but which I am obviously. But if your records start in 1881, that's yesterday, basically, in human existence. For most of human life, your parents, your grandparents, your XXX generation parents, they had the same standard of living. This is a relatively recent thing. And there's no God-given right to have a higher or the same standard of living for this generation as the previous one. None at all. And no God-given right to live in a particular
You're right,
area
there
of
is no
London.
God-given
The
right.
second thing, which I could say, is that it's all about money with you young
Yeah.
folk. The thing is...
No, but it's okay for the old folk to say that, having taken all the money and then
well, let's
grumble
take
at
a
the
look at
youngsters
health.
for
Let's
going on
take a
about
look
it.
at health.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at health. There is today, I mean, I'm a beneficiary of it, there are today treatments and drugs and machines and things like stem cell research that will mean that a child born today will never have any of the diseases that are so commonplace and hit people so hard today. You know, they won't have so many strokes, they won't have so many cancers, they won't have all the other things that can go wrong in life. That is not something that shows up in your income numbers or house prices, but it's a real boon.
Advantage.
for
Well, there's
humanity.
something in that, isn't there, Laura?
There is.
And Shiv has got Spotify and he's got smartphone and
right.
he's got Facebook. He's got lots of things that, you know, Esther couldn't obviously even dream of.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference. But this kind of living standard versus the kind of weekly income.
Well, I think you're right to highlight health, and we have looked at the longevity improvements brought by healthcare that successive generations have enjoyed, and that is a benefit in itself and a measure of progress. But it does highlight longer retirements in which people are going to need to raise a greater degree of wealth and assets to live through them securely. So I think, and you're right to highlight, it's not just about current incomes, but I think the big ticket items, a decent pension and a house that you own to provide you security in retirement. The reason why we've highlighted the lot of current pensioners in today's statistics is not due to pensioner bashing. It's certainly not due to generational war. It's because our concern is that this really welcome performance in current pensioner living standards is going to be a one-generation blip, with the generations coming behind them without those assets, not able to secure those living standards.
It is a one-generation blip because basically the pensions that you were promised, which you didn't give your parents, but which you're now getting, have been much more expensive than anyone anticipated because life expectancy shot up for your generation. So suddenly it is.
And what
really
are we
costing.
doing with our money? I mean, most older people that I know are actually using their money to help finance people of their children's generation and their grandchildren's generation. We are aware of that. We don't want to have money lying idle in the bank if it can improve the quality of life and give you the house you dream about and the television.
also-
Look, this is such rubbish because if if you run a country based on that kind of thinking, you end up with sort of a patronage society in which families who are wealthy get ahead and families who don't and aren't wealthy don't get ahead.
Laura,
there is no collective investment.
I think I'd put it slightly more differently, which is it's really welcome that parents and grandparents are supporting their children, and that is a really big trend. I think half of first-time buyers these days, somewhere around that, are getting help from family. The concern is that inheritance was mentioned in the package. If we rely on greater levels of inheritance to fund asset building for younger generations, we know that it's younger people with higher lifetime incomes who tend to get those inheritances. We're staring down the barrel of greater inequality in the future.
This is the point, is that the inequality, I think your report said, among his generation is worse than it is among the old generation. So you're cascading down inequality there.
That's right.
And it's accentuated.
And when you argue about, should we be focusing on intergenerational differences? Should we be focusing on class? Should we be focusing on the North and the South, all the things you mentioned? It's right to focus on all those things, but one really important reason to focus on these new generational divides that are very clear and are opening up is that there's a good chance they're going to fuel divisions between rich and poor, between different social classes in the future. So these issues are connected and they're real and they're important.
Can I ask Laura a question? When you were looking at these various statistics, is it not right that for the older generation, particularly the frail, very old, everything is more expensive? It's difficult for them to get around. It's difficult for them to get the right nutrition. Everything becomes expensive and difficult. Just getting the basic of a comfortable bed, being able to get out of that bed, being looked after properly. We don't want people to live in cold houses and die in cold houses because they can't afford to put the heating on. So there is an expense of old age, which I'm not sure.
And the very old ones are not among the richer pensioners.
Exactly.
It's the younger ones coming in who push the average up.
The typical pensioner income that we've talked about, it does not reflect individual experiences. We've got on average, richer, younger cohorts of pensioners coming in. You're absolutely right to highlight the very older pensioners, what we might call the silent generation. And our report does look in detail about the increased costs they face and why their income statistics might therefore overstate their living standards. So yes, we've gone into that in detail, and not everybody in the pensioner group's the same.
These averages cover a lot of sins. Thank you all very much indeed.